I think my very first role working with AI was in 1999.
What did you study?
Soviet foreign policy.
Makes perfect sense.
Total perfect sense.
So Heather, tell us briefly about your role at Path Robotics.
I get asked sometimes when I'm, at a cocktail party with friends, like, what is it you do? And I'm like, think about it. Look in the parking lot. Containers on the road, tractor trailers that have big chassis that have to be welded. In the U.S., 80% of the welding that is done manually today. 21% are 55 or older. This is not a job that you retire at 75 years old. It's very demanding on your body. So you are looking at, within 10 years, having 43% of our workforce for welding gone. It is a crisis in this country.
AI, is it going to replace people and what that means, obviously, for people's lives and jobs and things like that?
In the next 3 years, we will see more innovation than we've seen in the last 7. And I think that's the message to companies. You can't wait. It's here, and we have to figure out how to really harness it and leverage it for good. Ignoring it that is not a good strategy. This is not about replacing humans. We don't have the humans.
So Heather, tell us briefly about your role at Path Robotics and your journey into this space.
Yeah, so I started Path as the Chief Revenue Officer back in November of just this past year. Prior to that, I have worked about 25 years in the AI and robotics space, mostly in warehouse and logistics. This is my first foray into manufacturing robotics, so to speak. But I am responsible for all of our growth and revenue strategies for the company.
Wow, so in 25 years in AI and robotics, so
yeah, it's
a lot of
hard
change,
to
right?
Lots of change, and it's been a really, really interesting ride. I think my very first role working with AI was in 1999, and most people in 99, no one knew what AI, unless you were in science or heavy in deep learning and computation, you had no idea what that was. It was my first role as a salesperson, almost straight out of college, working for a company here in Nashville. The guy was a literal rocket scientist. He had this great, wild and crazy idea to create this AI algorithm for configuration technology and was trying to sell it into big box retailers. Okay. So trying to bridge the gap of explaining to a retailer in 1999 how AI is going to help them and they should put it in their store and have it help their customers order product. So that was my first experience with it. And then I've just grown and stayed with it kind of as a common thread through all of my journey since then.
Got it. And what did you study?
Soviet foreign policy.
Makes perfect sense.
Total perfect sense. It's way more relevant today than it was when I got out of college, actually. So, totally not related to AI at all.
Interesting. So you finished your degree and then you just found this sales job and...
Yeah, it's crazy.
That was your career path.
Yeah, I interviewed for a job at the ad. This was back when you had, the paper. That's how long ago this was. And I was in Atlanta looking for a role with, international relations. That's what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I'd work at CNN or the Jimmy Carter Center or something like that. And I found this ad that was looking for someone with IR experience. And so I sent my resume in. I was super excited. Guy calls me. I come in for the interview. 45 minutes later, he's like, I really like you, but you're not qualified for this job. I'm trying to figure out what investor relations experience you have. And I was like, I was trying to figure out what you have to do with international relations. And it was a sales role for selling into publicly traded companies. And he's like, I really like you. I think you do great at it. I'm going to give you a chance. And so I took the job and that started my sales path. Yeah. And then from there, I never went back to doing anything really with Soviet foreign policy. So, yeah.
And how, I don't, maybe this is just my perspective. It feels like AI in particular has moved a lot in the last few years, obviously, with the LLMs and things like that. How rapid was the growth before that, or was it Has it always been growing quickly, or what's been the...
It's really interesting. So back when I first started, like in the early 2000s, it was mostly systems that were rule-based. So it was AI, but it was all around structured kind of rule-based systems. And as the technology advanced and developed, it really was purely dependent on computational power and the amount of data available, because that's what AI needs in order to perform well and to really shine. You've got to have both of those things. And so the technology, it took a while in the beginning for the advances to happen because those two pieces were not aligned at the same time in terms of advancement. Yeah. What we really saw happen in 2023 was the emergence of really fast computing power, GPUs like what NVIDIA produces. And then on top of that, this massive data source by being able to go out to the internet and train a data model on everything on the internet. And that was really what brought us ChatGPT, right? So prior to that, it was these kind of step changes in advancement. But the most rapid has been in the last really probably 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. And that's interesting about technological advancement, isn't it? You need a convergence of multiple technologies at the same time.
Yeah. And what's interesting, there was a great article that Ray Kurzweil did in Time magazine, and it was the accelerating pace of change. And he was so accurate, but there's a curve. It's also Moore's law. It's like there's these step changes. What took 50 years to get this amount of advancement, in the next time period, it's only 40 years. And then the next time period, it's 15. And you watch this curve. And what that tells us is in the next 3 years, we will see more innovation than we've seen in the last 7. Which is mind-boggling. If you think where the technology was 7 years ago, and you think we're going to see more than that in a compressed 3-year time period, the rapid pace that it's changing is just staggering.
Yeah.
And I think that's the message to companies. You can't wait. If you don't understand it, that's okay. That lots of people, myself included, don't understand all the workings of it, but you can't wait. You can't just be left behind. It's here, and we have to figure out how to really harness it and leverage it for good.
Completely. And the only way to learn is to do, right? So your first AI strategy may not work, but just by taking that first step, that's how you learn, and then you build. And interesting. And you mentioned a lot of your career had been in logistics, moving into manufacturing. Now, this is a huge topic in the States.
It's a huge topic. Yeah. What I found so fascinating is there are a lot of similarities between the challenges we were solving with robotics and AI in a warehouse that are very similar to problems and challenges that we're facing in manufacturing. The difference is the skilled labor element. In a warehouse or a logistics facility, you're using an AI-driven robot to pick up an item from a tote and put that item into a box. That is a very low-skilled job. So a lot of temp workers do that job. You see a lot of seasonal workers during holiday peaks that are brought in, sometimes in the thousands, to warehouses to do that just during the 6 weeks of peak. So it's much more challenging to make the business case work for that because you can pretty much get anybody to do that job. When you look at manufacturing and what Path does in particular, and what excited me so much about getting into this space, is we're talking about a highly skilled job. Not just anybody can walk off the street and be a welder. There's certifications required. There's so many different complexities in that, and it's a very highly paid job. The welder is oftentimes the highest paid employee on the manufacturing floor. They're very hard to find. They take very advanced skills in order to do the job properly, and there's often very high safety and quality standards that come with things like a structural weld. And so when you couple all of those problems, it's just an area that has not been able to be automated really in an advanced way in the past because the technology wasn't there. But move forward to where we are now with the capabilities that we have with AI, and you couple that with solutions that can help address that skilled labor gap, and that's what gets really exciting.
We talked before, and you mentioned some of the, I guess, sort of facts and figures around the challenges of finding welders. And would you say we're at a bit of a make or break moment for manufacturing in the US when it comes to skilled labor yet?
Yeah, so there's this wonderful push to try and reshore, and it's happening in a couple of different ways. One is through just all manufacturing, but then we also have another push, which is coming from our military industrial base, where we are at a point in time where we are very, very far behind in the defense space. Shipbuilding in particular is notoriously dependent on very complex, complicated welding. Think nuclear submarines. There's all kinds of different certifications. The average manufacturing in the U.S., 80% of the welding that is done manually today. But in shipbuilding, it's greater than 90% that's done manually because of all these complexities. So when you look at the pressures that are coming in from both, private industry as well as government industry around defense, there is a massive, massive gap in available labor. Our welding workforce today, 21% are 55 or older. This is not a job that you retire at 75 years old. It's very demanding on your body. So we are facing a crisis in this country at a time when we're really relying on something like a highly skilled labor like a welder, and we're going to lose 21% of that workforce likely in the next 10 years. The next age group behind that is welders that are 45 to 55 years old. That age group is also 21%. It's like 21.7. So you are looking at within 10 years having 43% of our workforce for welding gone. Gone or really at the age of retirement. It is a crisis in this country. And it's something that I think most people don't think about. I get asked sometimes when I'm, at a cocktail party with friends, like, what is it you do? And I think about it. Drive around, look in the parking lot. Right now, if you looked out the window in the parking lot, you walked past a utility pole carrying power lines. Those are structural welds. You've passed containers on the road. You've passed tractor trailers that have big chassis that have to be welded. All of those things are structural welds that have to be done, for the most part, manually by a human today. The types of welding automation that's really stuck and done quite well in our country, it really developed around the 1950s to 70s, and it's in Tier 1 automotive. Because you can have a perfect part show up in the perfect place every time, and you're doing it a million times, the same thing. That works great for traditional welding automation. But the reason this other 80% hasn't been automated is because it's not perfect all the time. When you're melding these metals together, it just reacts differently every time. So that takes a skill set, that takes a human that has done this over a number of years to know exactly what to do, how to adjust, how to react. There's all these parameters. It's just been very difficult to automate in the past. But that's what's changing now with tools and capabilities like what Path offers with our AI solution.
This question may be way too broad to give a sensible answer to. If it is, I apologize, but how much of the welding that's currently happening do you think can be automated, roughly?
Yeah, I think a very good bit of it with the right capabilities. I think a ton of that 80% can be captured. It's the biggest issue is really having a system that can learn and adapt to what it's seeing. And so what we do with Path is we have our own we really leaned into creating our own vision system because it's so critical that the robot is seeing all the right elements and parameters when it's looking at the weld. And so we have a vision system that is seeing what's happening. And then we have our AI model, our brain, that is thinking about what it's seeing and making a decision on what to do next with that torch. Where do I put it? What speed? What variables do I need to adjust in order to make this weld come out correctly? So that type of capability is allowing us to really go way further into that 80% of what we can weld with automation.
Obviously, whenever people talk about AI, there's the whole, is it going to replace people and what that means, obviously, for people's lives and jobs and things like that. For the Path products and arms to work, what kind of labor do you need or skills do you need to be able to operate the machines?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot, and I oftentimes it comes from people outside of the manufacturing space that understand this is not about replacing humans. We don't have the humans. Yeah. I mean, it's such a critical issue. They're not there. And the ones that are there are very good at what they do. And they work very, very, very hard jobs. Yeah. And so it's about augmenting the ones that we have and helping them to do the jobs they do by taking on some of the things that are much more challenging. If you think of a utility pole that you have passed by a million times and never looked at and never thought about, I have a picture from a go live yesterday the guy sent me, and one of the guys is at least 6'2", and that pole is several feet taller than him, and they're just standing out beside it. Well, to weld that pole, you have to have ladders. You got to climb on top. You've got to climb inside the pole, and then you've got to have it heated. So you've got these flamethrowers and torches that are heating the metal while someone is climbing around on a ladder. They also have to make sure they have their eyes protected. Right. It's a dirty, dangerous job, and there aren't enough people to do it. So that the real answer is it's augmenting, not replacing the humans. So then you take a step further and say, okay, what do you need to do to run the cell? And one of the things that makes our solution very attractive to customers is we have taken it to the point where rather than having to know how to program a robot, because we think finding welders is hard, finding welding robot programmers is almost as hard. And they make about as much. So just shifting the problem to needing to find programmers is really not going to be the solution. So that's where something like a Path solution, where we basically take the CAD file, which the customer's already going to have for that part, and you load that up into our software, and then we use that CAD file to annotate where the seams need to be welded and to pick which weld plan based on the material and the type of part is required. And then you click go. And then the robot goes in, scans the part, so it's looking at it to see what it's dealing with, how perfect is the fit up, how much variance is there, and then it makes the adjustments, and then it welds. So
pretty cool. Can you take me back to the time when, or the first time you saw one of these arms do its job? Like, just explain that picture to us.
Yeah, so I'll take you back even a little further than that. So I do get this question sometimes too, like what made you go from like warehouse and logistics, where I'd been for the better part of 20 years doing that, to manufacturing and welding. About 2015-ish, my husband opened his own manufacturing facility in Nashville. And one big component of what they did was welding. And every night, that was the one thing every night when he came home. It was such a pain. Yeah. And it was the bottleneck for the rest of the operation. It was the highest paid employee we had. We could never depend on them to show up. I mean, it was constant turnover. The welders would leave for, just $1 more an hour somewhere else. Yeah. It was just a very difficult role to fill. And he had that business for about 5 or 6 years and eventually sold it, and partially because of the pain of just the welding as part of the overall operation. And so when I got the call and learned about Path and what Path was doing, I was wildly interested because I'd lived that personal story with him of just how difficult as an owner and a manufacturer it was to really plan your business, plan your operations around something that seemed so out of control a lot of the time around the labor availability. So that got me interested. So when I first saw it, the very first time I saw it, it was FabTech, which is the big industry show for fabrication. And I hadn't accepted the job yet. And so I grabbed David, my husband, and we got on a plane and we went down to FabTech. And so we walked the floor. We saw everybody, and I wanted to see what the other companies were doing in the industry and how Path's solution looked compared to what else was on the floor. Yeah. And it just blew me away. And the team is incredible. The vision's incredible. And I was super excited to be a part of it at that point. Everybody says they have AI now. You cannot, if you go to any trade show anywhere, AI, it's just everywhere. And so we are definitely at this upper side of a hype cycle. So it's helping people understand, how do you really evaluate it? Like, how do you get true business value out of the solution rather than just something that is a bunch of noise?
Yeah. If there's one belief about AI in 2025 that needs to die, what do you think that is?
Okay, well, I have this great quote, and I won't remember it, off the top of my head, but it is in my presentation. And I can't remember what publication said it, but they quoted someone as, the hype is so big right now. If you listen to Bill Gates, it will solve climate change. But if you listen to Jeffrey Hinton, it was going to just destroy humanity. So it's like, which one? And so I think my core message is, let's leave the extremes out of it, because depending on which one you want to believe, you can think it's going to solve everything to it's going to destroy everything. Okay. Again, it's probably, neither extreme of those. It's probably somewhere in the middle is where we're going to find the value, and where we all should try and be level-headed and lean in on, okay, let's focus on what we can really do with this tool to help move our businesses forward.
How do you, especially as someone who's, right at the forefront of this, how do you personally stay on top of the different innovations? What's real, what isn't?
Yeah.
What advice could you give to people on how to sort of stay current?
Yeah, I think for me, I just got back from the Robotics Summit in Boston this week, and I try to listen to a lot of thought leaders and hear how they're talking about it. Yeah. I also am a huge fan of podcasts, and just am a continuous learner. The technology is just changing so fast. No one knows all the things and has all the answers. So try to be as well-rounded as you can in understanding and recognize what you don't know, and then go try to find resources that can help you get a little bit better handle on the different concepts and topics. And I do a ton of things, from listening to podcasts, attending industry conferences, and just networking. I have a lot of people over the course of my career that are in different types of companies and roles, and I spend a lot of time just talking to other business leaders about what they're seeing, what they're doing, what challenges, what successes they've had, to really get a better understanding of how others are leveraging it too.
At the moment, it looks like, and I say looks like because things change regularly, there's going to be a decoupling from China, especially. How do you think that's going to impact the development of AI and, importantly, robotics here in the US?
Yeah, I think people should really be paying attention to what is happening in with investments in things like OpenAI. Stargate is huge. Between SoftBank, they've put in $40 billion into OpenAI as an investment. They're really picking a horse in the race. And between Oracle, OpenAI, and SoftBank, they've committed $500 billion to building data centers out. So I think there's some serious commitments to make sure that we retain a lead in this country, and that we continue to kind of move and advance forward in that. And it's not just OpenAI. If you look at the investments in data centers, there's been $314 billion a year over the next 5 years that's been committed by major companies. So you've got Meta has dedicated somewhere around $65 billion annually as their commitment. Google's is around $90 billion. Microsoft has committed another, I want to say theirs was like $85 billion. So between those kind of four primary players, it's roughly $315 billion a year for 5 years in building data centers. And that's all in this country, in the United States. Yeah. It's a massive investment.
Probably going to require a lot of welding.
Huge amounts of welding. Huge amounts of welding. We are having lots of those conversations. What's interesting that people are so focused on, we need to get these data centers built so we can keep our leading edge and discovery and advancements. Well, what do you think goes into those data centers? You need utility poles to carry the power lines. You need HVAC systems to provide cooling. You need tanks to provide the liquids for some of the cooling. Yeah. All of those components are welded. Yeah. For one specific component of our infrastructure, a transformer. In 2022, the lead time to manufacture a transformer was about 80 weeks. So at the time, the government came together, issued the infrastructure bill. It was $1.2 trillion to modernize the grid in this country. And it was really an awareness that without that grid modernization, that is a national security issue. If our grid goes down, we're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And you got one component that you have to have power going across power lines. And the lead time's 80 weeks for a single transformer. So we get this bill, we throw a bunch of money at the problem. Great. Fast forward to 2025, that lead time has gone up to 120 weeks. So the problem's gotten worse, not better. And why? Well, the NAIC is a committee that's been put together to understand what is happening with our infrastructure and advise the president on what can be done. They went out and did 30 studies. They came back with 300 recommendations. And one of the top ones was, we have to automate because the skilled labor, such as welding, does not exist. Yeah. And these companies cannot produce the products needed to modernize our grid and build our data centers if they can't find the labor to do it. And so it is a huge, huge focus for us right now.
Clearly, from what you're saying there, the future sounds very bright for Path, right? I mean, there's so much scope for what you guys offer. What are the challenges that you specifically see for the company, and I guess just to automation in general?
The challenges that I would say for automation in general is a lot of times it's just changing people's thinking about what's possible. Like I said, traditional robotic welding is not new. And so a lot of manufacturers have tried it before, but they tried it 5 years ago or 10 years ago when these capabilities didn't exist. And so it didn't work. And so they kind of wrote it off as, we tried that, it didn't work, the robot's over there under a tarp. So, I mean, literally, that's what I hear. And you can see it if you walk around some of these facilities. And so I think it's helping people understand how far the technology has come and putting together a model for them that allows them to take advantage of all of the advancements that we've seen in this space in particular with AI and with the vision system capabilities. Taking advantage of all of that without making investments that lock you in to a very specific moment in time on what the technology can do. And for that, I'm speaking specifically to this concept of CapEx spend versus a RAS model, which is what Path offers. The reason we do that is we believe very strongly in that, the next 3 years, we're going to see greater innovation than the last 7. Why are you going to buy an asset that you're going to sweat for 10 to 20 years, but it's never changing? Yeah. Like the best it's ever going to be is the day you turn it on. Yeah. That makes no sense, really. But it's changing the way we think in this country about how we invest in capital for facilities like manufacturing. What we really need to be talking about is how do we leverage the OpEx spend that we are going to spend on the labor anyway. How can we take those dollars and invest in something that is going to give us a greater payback, but is going to stay current? And so as those changes happen under that RAS model, if there's new sensors, if there's new vision cameras that come out, I mean, your iPhone, how many times have you bought an iPhone and within 6 months there's a brand new camera that's 1 million times better, but you've got a 3-year agreement? Yeah. Well, the same thing happens on the factory floor with these robots. Yeah. So we don't do that. We do it as a RAS model so that we can constantly keep updating because it makes our system better to be able to leverage the greatest, latest technology that's out there. So it's some of those things. It's getting people used to thinking differently and being open to a buying model that they may not be super familiar with or comfortable with.
And when you say a RAS model, what is that?
It's robot as a service. So think of right now, if you are a manufacturer and you've got a 4-year backlog of orders to make whatever it is you make. Let's say you make battery enclosures for data centers, and there's a huge backlog of data centers. So you got a 4-year backlog. You're going to we had one customer, they needed to hire 200 welders is what they were going to need to hire in order to open the facility and hit the order volumes that they had from their customer. they could not find 200 welders. So they allocated OpEx spend to hire those employees. We came in and offered them to hire a robot as an employee instead. And that one robot, for what you would spend for a welder, we could produce, in their case, 12 welders worth of work in that one cell. Wow. So that one robot cell is going to do the output of what 12 welders would do. So rather than spending X dollars a year for 12 people, you spend X dollars a year for the robot.
Given what you were saying before about the workforce, people exiting it, if some of these companies don't act now, thinking particularly about like the infrastructure sector that you talked about, utility providers, what's going to be the cost?
I think they won't survive because somebody else will. I mean, if you look back at when we first started doing real automation in this country, think back to when, Henry Ford kind of came up with the concept that he did. Look at the companies that were the top 100 companies at the time. The ones that automated are the ones that survived the next 50 years. When you go back and look 2, 3, 4 decades, there's always this shift that's happening in business. And the companies that make the leap and can continue to survive and thrive, they're the ones that innovate. They're the ones that automate. The ones that stick to the same way they've always done it and don't make those investments in critical transitions like this, they don't survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That simple, right?
Pretty much. Yeah.
It is. You spoke before when we asked about some of the challenges that you foresaw, talked about people's mindsets, and kind of you just addressed that again there. With what you're doing being so critical to the future of the country, whether you talked about building defense capabilities before, to being able to maintain the power grid, to helping companies stay competitive. What else would be helpful for you in terms of how is the government, for example, supporting Path in this? Is there a collaboration there? Or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a couple of things. One, I mentioned the things like the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act.
Yeah.
Also, there is a program for the military industrial base. It's called the MIB. There's an acronym for everything.
Of course.
And the MIB is actively working with companies to help get you through the process of working with the government. So they will work with you to determine what your certifications and capabilities for us, for the welding standards, but they don't just do welding. It's all things military industrial base. And so there are groups and programs that have been put in place to try and help expedite and get new technologies and new suppliers into the portfolio to try and expedite this. There is an awareness that we are way, way, way far behind. If you pay attention to some of the recent executive orders, there's now a new Office of Shipbuilding, and there's a huge focus on it, which is a great thing. And they are putting some programs in place that are accessible by companies like Path and others to try and figure out how to begin to work with the government and how to get through some of those processes that in the past have taken a pretty long time. There's an awareness that they've got to do things a little differently in order to take advantage of the technologies that are out there.
Yeah. What does the competitive landscape look like for Path and your products? Are there other competitors here in the US doing something similar? Or?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there are people that are definitely with the traditional robotics. I mean, typically when we look at working with a customer, they really have kind of 4 options on the table, right? One is just status quo. We're just going to continue to do it the way we're doing it. We're going to, slog through and then just hope for the best and not make any major changes right now. And that works right now for some people because in some areas there's a lot of volatility. That is not going to work for people that are in any of those categories that we mentioned, like infrastructure, data centers, anything that's got a massive demand. You're just not going to be able to do that. Someone else will come in and innovate in a way to take the orders that you're not going to be able to fill because you've got 4-year backlog. So That's the status quo. The second is traditional robotics. There are some cases where if you really do have a very simple part and you can fit that same part up every time and have a millimeter, sub-millimeter gap, a traditional robot's probably okay for you. So that means someone just pre-programs that robot. And there are lots of companies and integrators out there that will do that for you. And those are great solutions for certain types of implementations. But then you've got the third, which is a company like Path that is going to not require the pre-programmed robot, is going to leverage more of an intelligent automation solution that will be able to adapt and interact as needed to handle and make the adjustments. There are very few companies that are doing that. Path is one of them. I can only think of one or two others I've ever even heard of that are doing it. And I would say when it comes to the competitive landscape for us, we've been around for 8 years. We were founded by two brothers out of Columbus, Ohio, that both got their PhDs in AI. And when they were coming out of school, they really were looking for where can we really take what we've learned in school and address an actual problem. And coming out of a manufacturing family, coming out of Ohio, Andy, our CEO, learned to weld when he was 8 years old in his dad's shop. Manufacturing runs deep in their roots. Yeah. And so this was a problem they understood and one they really felt like needed to be solved. So we've been doing this for 8 years. And we go back to the beginning of the conversation. What is something that makes AI so powerful? It's the data, right? Well, when you talk about taking AI into the physical world, out of the digital and into the physical, there's this problem with the simulation to real world disconnect. And it gets really bad when you're talking about physical things. The simulators that are on the market just don't really know how to handle all of the different variables in physics. And so you can put it in the model and it looks like it's going to do one thing. And then when you get it in the real world, it just doesn't. Yeah. And so that is a huge gap. And what you need to overcome that gap is real data. Well, there aren't any other companies out there that have been doing this for 8 years where they have been collecting all of the data of millions upon millions upon millions of welds done that is built into the core of our model. So when you think about learning and training a system to become better and better and better, the amount of data you have and the amount of time you've been able to do that is going to make your system smarter and smarter and smarter. So I can't speak to the others, but I can tell you for what we do, we've been doing this for 8 years, and we started with an AI-first approach because that was the core of our company. Whereas some of these others started as hardware companies first and then tried to layer on the AI as a kind of secondary thing, and it's just a very different approach.
Big difference. I never really got Tesla previously and how the stock just kept going up and the multiple that it was getting. And I used to keep betting that it would drop because I was like, it's a car company. Why does it have such a... And I lost a lot, well, not a lot of money, but enough to annoy me. And then I got in one and I saw that's what it was. It was gathering data, and that's now a key part of their value, right? Going forward I don't know, in 10 years, we probably won't think of Tesla as a car company, I would imagine. You're able to gather all this data, and the more people using the arms, the better the service is going to be. I mean,
everybody in the industry, like I said, I was just in Boston at the Robotics Summit, and one of the key topics at the conference was how do we have our ChatGPT moment in robotics? And the challenge is the data, because you don't have the internet. The internet doesn't do us any good. It's not like we can go like ChatGPT did and go and scour the internet and have all of these sources and learn from what we're just reading on the internet. We can't do that for physical world. So there is no place you can go and see gazillions of different welds to train a model. So we have to do that ourselves. We have to collect that data ourselves.
So it has to learn by doing.
It has to learn by doing.
Interesting.
And so the simulation capability is just not like I said, the gap from sim to real world is just too big right now. And so the best way to train it is on real data where it can see what really happened when I had this heat temperature, these two metals, when I had the torch at this angle, when I rotated at this in the sense, it's all of those factors, the voltage, all that stuff comes into play. And so it really, the best way is to have the real data.
Yeah. And I guess you need those early adopters because, again, even when you're testing it, if you're testing it in your own controlled environment, that's going to be completely different to a customer who...
Yeah, we had a great examples. We had a release. I learned this the hard way. We had a customer come in for a visit, and we were going to show them the latest robotic cell and the latest release on the cell. And their focus was cycle time, because cycle time, that means how fast can the robot weld that part and cycle through and then go on to the next part. And a key part of cycle time is you need to be able to scan and see the part, and then you need to execute the weld, and then you need to scan and make sure that you had good post-weld quality. So we go in, we're getting ready to look at the scan and weld part, and it just as slow as it can be. And I'm like, something's wrong. Like, why is this so slow? Well, turns out the developers had been testing on that cell, and they had reverted to an older version of the software and in part of their testing, and they didn't switch it back to the latest release. It was 2.5 times faster in the latest release. Yeah. 2.5 times. And what that means for our customers is when we push that out, because we're a RAS model, they don't pay for that. That release gets updated and pushed out to them, and they get the benefit of what all of the AI model has been learning over all of the welds that have been done and all of the training. Every release we push out, it just gets better and better. Unlike, we talked about the traditional, the best it's ever going to be is the day you turn it on. Because from that point forward, it's not going to get any better. Yeah. And that's the difference.
Yeah. Let's talk about the next 12 months. So in your role, Chief Revenue Officer.
Yeah.
What does a good or even a great 12 months look like from here?
Yeah, I think continuing to focus on really honing in where we deliver the most value and focusing on those types of customers and opportunities, and really getting out and talking to people and bringing awareness to the market of what is truly possible. Not the hype, but like what is truly possible? What are we able to deliver for customers? Where is the technology really at today? And how can we get out and help more companies be able to take advantage of that?
And what does that process look like? So a customer sees the product, listens to this podcast, whatever the case may be, and thinks that sounds interesting. Talk us through that journey that you would take them on.
Yeah. So oftentimes what happens is we'll have someone reach out. They're exploring, they're learning. And so we'll tell them a little bit about the company and the technology. We'll ask for them to send us their parts, because the first thing we need to do is look at how much weld scope they have on the part. Some things aren't going to make sense. If you just have a little bit of weld, juice isn't going to be worth the squeeze. But if you got parts that have a lot of weld and you have a very hard time finding employees in your area, then very likely it's going to be a no-brainer on the payback. So first thing we do is we have them send us their parts, and we will run that through our software that will look at the part in CAD and determine how much of the weld scope we can do with the robot versus would need to be done by a human. And then once we've validated that there's a good fit with our capability, we usually will work with the customer to go through. They'll come on site, they'll see a demo, we'll show them the business case of this is how fast we can run your part through our cell and compare that versus how much time it takes them to do that with a human. And oftentimes the lowest I've seen is like a 4-to-1 ratio. And so it's pretty compelling. Yeah. And from there, it's a pretty easy process. That's pretty much it. But the first thing is just having a conversation to understand what their parts look like so that we can see, is this a good fit or not?
And in that demonstration, are you showing them literally the part that they would want welded in front of them? Or would it be more sort of...
We'll do it virtually first through the software and the application. Okay. The way our contracts are structured and worked, we have this concept of a factory acceptance test. And so we will align on what parts our solution can weld and how much of that scope we will be taking on. And we will commit to what the cycle time is that we can hit. And then they will send us those parts and we will run that through that factory acceptance test. And once they see that we have been able to hit the cycle time that we committed to and that we can weld the parts to the quality standards, then it's accepted and moves on to their floor. Yeah. We had one, a customer, it was in December that they reached out to us. And from the very first time we talked to them to contract, it was 68 days. And from the time we first talked to them to install on their floors, 111 days. I mean, it's super fast.
Yeah.
And this is like mission critical stuff for them. It's really, really an interesting time to be in this space.
What would you say to an executive who is not, well, they're thinking about their business going forward and they're not making AI central to their business model? What would you say to that person?
I would advise them to find someone that they trust to talk to about the use cases that could benefit them. Don't try to do all things at once. Don't try to get too fancy and overcomplicated. Just start with one thing. And I would look at, as a business, what are your top 3 initiatives? What's the biggest risk to your business? Because I guarantee you somewhere in that, whether it's revenue generation, whether it's risk mitigation, whether it's profit that you're concerned about and cutting costs, whether it's the tariffs and how are you going to mitigate against the impact of tariffs to your business and those losses. Any of those things, there are AI-centric solutions that can help you mitigate each and every one of those key strategic initiatives. It's finding the right ones that tie to something that's really going to move the needle, but start with one. Don't try to do everything. But ignoring it is just, that is not a good strategy. That will not be a good strategy for longevity. Yeah.
Fair enough. Finally, before we wrap up, just want to do a quick fire round.
Okay.
So just say the first thing that comes to mind.
Oh, no.
We didn't tell you about this bit.
No.
Biggest leadership lesson?
Oh, biggest leadership lesson. To trust my gut and speak up when I know something is not going to work. Like, really, really understand. And it was a big lesson I learned at one particular role at one particular company. It was my first time in that role. And I was surrounded by a bunch of really, really wicked smart people. And we were putting strategies together and a plan together that I just knew, like in my gut, that's just not going to work. But I quite honestly was a bit intimidated by all the other experience in the room that I just didn't speak up enough and strongly enough. And that was my biggest lesson because the impact of that to other people around me, it was a painful one to learn. Yeah. But it helped shape me and make me a better leader today to not make those same mistakes. Yeah.
And I guess as well, when you're working with your team, you're probably trying to create an environment where people can voice out, right? For sure. Yeah. Okay. Your most used app?
Oh, goodness. I would have to say it's It's probably my podcast app. I mean, that's such a weird answer, but I travel so much that I like to listen to different. I am constantly in learning mode, so I'm always wanting to learn something new or stretch myself or hear something new. So I have like a ton of just queued up podcasts. So when I run on the treadmill, I'm listening to one. When I'm in the airplane, during takeoff and landing, I'm listening to something. When I'm in the car. So that's honestly, if you probably looked at it'd probably be my podcast.
Interesting. And which top 3 podcasts that you like to listen to?
I love the Manufacturing Executive, Joe Sullivan over at Gorilla 76. I think he does a really good job with that. I love NVIDIA's AI podcast. They always have just a wide range. It's kind of like a fascinating, different, variation of people that are on there. And then there's another one that's more focused on retail. But I spent so many years in retail, I still like to listen to that one because I kind of can stay abreast of what's happening in that space.
Yeah. Always learning.
Yeah.
Guilty pleasure.
Ooh, my guilty pleasure is I love coffee, like an insane amount. Yeah. It's an unhealthy amount.
Really?
Yeah.
How many cups a day are we talking?
We shouldn't share those numbers. It depends. Like when I'm home, it's I don't even want to say it. It's bad.
Yeah.
I would say probably 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Wow. Easily. On a day that I'm home. Yeah. It's not when I travel, though. I'll get my 1 cup, in the hotel or out the door, and I'm fine. But days that I'm at home, it is crazy. It's just crazy.
Yeah. I'm very similar when I'm at the desk.
Yeah.
It's just like you just want to have something.
It's habit, especially when it's cold.
Yeah.
It's not good.
If things had worked out differently in your life, what's another career path you could have imagined yourself doing?
Oh, gosh. Well, I would have been a diplomat, or had that been a real international relations role instead of investor relations, I'd have maybe worked for CNN or, been doing something with foreign policy. Yeah.
Do you speak any Russian?
Not anymore. No, it's been too long ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Final quick fire question. Finish this sentence. AI isn't about replacing people. It's about
augmenting them.
Fantastic. And as you know, this podcast is all about creating connections and the impact these connections can have on our lives. What's the most memorable, and this could be good or bad, thing anyone has ever said to you that you felt might have changed your path in your life?
Oh, goodness. I had an executive assistant to a CEO one time tell me that she was leaving, and I had really grown fond of her because we ended up having to communicate constantly through a couple of projects, and she was getting ready to leave, and I was like, "Oh, where are you going and why are you leaving?" And she said, "Well, I'm an up or out girl." And I thought, I'm an up or out girl. That's an interesting perspective. So if I'm not moving up, I'm moving out. And that stuck with me. Just as I took opportunities and looked at where I wanted to be, was just don't let yourself get stagnant in one thing. Always be thinking about what can you do that's up, or do you need to think about broadening and moving out? So that was something that stuck with me.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.